Hi everybody, this is Ginger and you're watching Gnostic Psych, the channel where I share with you the arcane and interesting related to psychology. And today we're going to be covering part 2 of the Satanic Panic. Where I left off last time, I was just talking about the defendants in the McMartin preschool trial basically being acquitted. Raymond Buckey was retried in 1990, but there was a mistrial. So, as far as the outcome of the trial, law enforcement searched all the locations where the crimes were supposedly carried out. The grounds around the school were excavated. There were no tunnels or any evidence found. So what exactly happened? How did all the lurid, horrifying, and outlandish accusations by hundreds of children who had attended the preschool turn out to be false? Well, to begin with, law enforcement personnel, social workers, and therapists and the cases of alleged abuse engaged in what is referred to as confirmation bias while investigating the allegations. For example, rather than investigate the allegations from a place of impartial neutrality and then draw their conclusions after weighing all the evidence first, they instead drew their conclusions that the defendants were guilty and tried to find evidence to fit the conclusions. This, of course, goes against the tradition of using the scientific method for inquiry, including forensics. The prosecution even hired Michelle Smith and Lawrence Pasdar, co-authors of the hoax book Michelle Remembers, as expert consultants in the case. The children were interrogated rather than questioned. Using their intimidation factor as authority figures, children were pressured with leading questions by law enforcement and social workers. Children would sometimes be questioned for hours until they gave the answer that the authorities wanted, even though the young interviewees insisted that they were not harmed. The worst offender when it came to leading questions was Key McFarland. McFarland's use of anatomically correct dolls and questions like, point to the place on the doll where the bad man touched you, contributed more to pop culture fodder than to evidence-based, best practice methods for working with children who were allegedly abused. When she received an answer that she didn't want from a child she was questioning, she was reported to have responded, "What good are you? You're just a scaredy cat," or "You're dumb." McFarland diagnosed nearly all of the children she questioned as being victims of satanic ritual abuse. District Attorney Philiboshin wanted her to elicit answers from the children that would hold up with the judge in court against the defendants. Therefore, there was pressure on McFarland to function more as a forensic interviewer rather than an actual counselor to the children. The interviewing of the children operated under a misconception that abuse and other forms of trauma are buried deep within the subconscious and forgotten. The concept referred to as repressed memories has been disproven by studies conducted by psychologists. The results have shown that rather than the burial of trauma by the psyche, traumatic experiences are actually remembered vividly by the person affected. The concept of buried trauma actually originated in the early work of Freud using hypnosis on patients who were afflicted by hysteria. In what Freud coined as a seduction theory, he reported that every patient he hypnotized shared that they had been sexually abused as children. At first he thought that there was a correlation between sexual abuse and hysteria. However, he abandoned the theory after considering that not everyone who was sexually abused later developed hysteria, and not everyone with hysteria was sexually abused. What really had happened with his patients was a phenomenon called false memory syndrome, whereby a hypnotized person can report whole events that never occurred simply by being hypnotically suggestible and being asked leading questions by the hypnotist. It is not very different from a hypnotist asking volunteers to sit on a stage, hypnotize them, and then tell them to act silly. The only difference with the person experiencing false memory syndrome is that she's the one that's leading the hypnotic experience rather than the hypnotist. However, false memory syndrome was not known until the aftermath of the Satanic Panic. Therefore, radical feminists like Florence Rush and Jeffrey Masson, who argued that Freud's seduction theory was real, that he covered up his findings out of intellectual cowardice, and sexual abuse was nearly universal, actually would dominate the conversation and the narrative about child sexual abuse during the 1970s and the 1980s. And this narrative was later adopted by social workers like Key McFarland. It had also reached the defense team that the prosecution knowingly withheld 2 key pieces of evidence which took the wind out of the prosecutor's arguments. The first was that Matthew, the son of Judy Johnson, had never identified Raymond Buckey in a series of photos as the man who allegedly raped him. The other was that Judy Johnson had been diagnosed with acute paranoid schizophrenia in 1985. Though she admitted that she had a chronic psychotic illness, the prosecution withheld the diagnosis until a year later. Because of her schizophrenia, Judy was prone to persecutory delusions of a sexual nature. During the Manhattan Beach Police Department's investigation, she continued to call them with outlandish accusations that she reported Matthew had made, like Matthew's allegations that Raymond Buckey was able to fly, that he accompanied a goat man who was present during episodes of abuse, and that Raymond Buckey had actually owned lions, and one of the lions had mauled Matthew. The description sounded more like psychotic delusions than legitimate accusations. When the defense found out about the withheld evidence, especially about Judy Johnson, one of the prosecutors, Glenn Stevens, left the team out of protest. In addition, other outlandish claims were made by other children who were interviewed. For example, some of them were saying that they were taken up in hot air balloons for being transported from one abuse site to the other. Some were flushed down toilets so they could be abused in the sewers. There were corpses being dug up from cemeteries for some of the rituals. The trial had ruined the lives of the McMartin family members. Though they were eventually exonerated, they had to sell their preschool building to their defense attorney, Daniel Davis, as payment for his legal fees. Attempts were made to sue people who later made defamatory statements about them being satanic ritual abusers. In one case, the judge awarded each of them a whole $1 in damage. There were many who were accused in separate cases during the Satanic Panic who weren't as lucky as the McMartins with legal representation. As a consequence, many who went to court over accusations of satanic ritual abuse ended up spending decades behind bars for crimes they never committed. Hundreds of people were accused of crimes that they were innocent of. 190 were actually charged of satanic ritual abuse crimes, and 83 were actually convicted and imprisoned. Despite the fact that the McMartins and other defendants were later exonerated, there were many Americans with fundamentalist Christian beliefs and a conspiracy-thinking mindset who believed that the McMartins and other satanic ritual abusers' crimes were covered up by a powerful underground satanic conspiracy. Well, as always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. And I also want to put a shout out to my current subscribers that I really appreciate you guys subscribing. And I hope to see you all when I make the next one. Thank you.